How do you use debt strategically to build wealth?
And I was kind of talking about portfolio and investments and in strategy.
So if we go at like timeline of people's life, it's like start with student loans, right?
Not everything is a nail and you need a hammer.
Well, you've heard Trump say that the data isn't real.
A 5-year fix, 10-year fix, 25-year fix. And what type of loan product is that?
5-year fix is the most common you see, right? The secondary market like is like CMBS loans, insurance companies.
Leave more money in the deal.
Welcome to the Dental Real Estate Partners Show. Our wealth strategy session today: when to leverage or deleverage your portfolio. How do you use debt strategically to build wealth? We have a great show today. With me is the Sultan of Smart Money, Dr. Reed Faldet.
Well,
Reed, good morning.
thanks for having me. I love the drama, the build-up.
I'm feeling it. I'm feeling dramatic today. Reed, who are we trying to help, and what problem are we trying to solve today?
I mean, anyone who is considering investing or generating a return and using debt to do so, like you want to consider debt as a tool, but also know that it can cause problems for you and put you in a bad situation. So there was in our private Facebook group, somebody had commented on one of my posts, and I was kind of talking about portfolio and investments and in strategy. And they had basically said, but when do you stop using debt and think about deleveraging your portfolio to reduce risk? And I thought that was a good question, and I think it's one worth discussing because there's a lot of different ways to look at it, and it can be super complex. But I think if we can just try to boil down into some maybe simple principles that people could think through. I think there are people that are way too debt adverse and leave a lot of money on the table in terms of return because they never use debt. And I think there's people that probably over leverage and take on too much risk. And I think there's a balance in there. So I think we should definitely talk about that.
Yeah, I've seen it done successfully both ways. Yeah, so both are options. Either not utilizing debt at all or utilizing debt. But it definitely affects your strategy and your growth rate. Yeah, do you want to kind of break it down and we'll go through it?
Yeah. So again, I think these are a couple things we'll hit on, and then I'll kind of give you kind of my take. And so I think we'll talk about concepts of debt as a hedge against inflation. So just we'll talk about some of the pros and cons of debt. So debt as a hedge against inflation, the benefit of paying down debt versus being more liquid, right? And we can discuss, you and I, on how we strategize around that. And maybe talk about like the different debt tools we use. We in a prior show we were talking a little bit about short-term bridge debt in certain situations, long-term fixed rate debt, agency debt, just depending on basically matching the debt to the business plan and strategy, right? And so debt is a tool, so you want to use it where it's most effective, how it best fits the situation, right? Not everything is a nail and you need a hammer, so you kind of have to change your tool accordingly. So I think you will have great insight on that because you're a better debt engineer than I am. So you'll have a lot to say. So kind of what I said about it, just to try to answer it, is it really just depends on season of life, your overall goals, and in basically how you perceive risk. And I was basically talking about like early on when you don't have a lot of money, your only choice is to use leverage if you're trying to buy real estate. And the returns are usually the best the more levered you are. So pursuing a commercial property at 25% down versus 50% down is drastically going to change your return profile when you're looking at return on your cash invested or return on equity. I think at some points you go from like maximizing your returns every time to preservation and mitigating risk. And this is what we'll probably talk about, restructuring your debt, right, into more long-term fixed rate debt. So we can kind of hit on that a little bit. But I think the biggest thing that I have a hard time conceptualizing to people is when you get to a point where you have a decent amount of debt and you have a large portfolio, liquidity becomes so important. And so you really have to throw the Dave Ramsey thought of paying down debt aggressively as possible out the window because your liquidity is your safety net and you don't know where you're going to have a problem. So if I have a ten property commercial real estate portfolio and each property is a different stage, some are going to be at higher risk than others, meaning that I might have a point in time where I might have to infuse more cash, assuming maybe there's an upcoming vacancy risk or there's a renovation that needs to happen, etc. And if I don't always can't pinpoint when that risk may happen, I don't know where to allocate the capital to, and therefore I have to keep a nice liquid reserve. So that's kind of your core emergency fund. So you have a choice between either paying down the extra debt or maintaining the liquidity, and there's a fine balance there. So I'm kind of rambling on a few things here, but like, what do you want to pull from that, Josh? And like, what would you like to talk about?
Um, yeah, so those are all good points, Reed. Those are really good points. I kind of just start like timeline. Sometimes it's like, what tooth do you start with, right? I start at one and I go to 32 because it just helps me stay like linear. Um, So if we go at like timeline in people's life, it's like start with student loans, right? You know, before I got into school, a bunch of people were I missed this boat, so don't envy me. They had like the 2% loans, right? They graduated down to school with like 2% loans, and you're like, F, man, I miss that. Uh and then they're like, yeah, I don't think I'm ever going to pay them off. And I'm like, you shouldn't. If I think real inflation is 4%, and again, people ask me, why do I think real inflation is 4%? Well, you've heard Trump say that the data isn't real, jobs numbers, inflation numbers, right? It's not real. Back in the 80s, the way they calculate it is more real. They don't calculate it anymore that way. And then you just anecdotally look around you, right? You hear me say this, like Washington State just increased insurance costs 21% this year. Okay, they approved that. Come on. Energy costs have increased 30% the last 3 years. Like, I'm not buying this 2.5% inflation, right? Anecdotally, it just doesn't make sense, right? You always need a story, but then you need the numbers, and it's just not making sense for me. So I like to use 4% because a lot of the guys that really dive into this often come up with numbers like 6, 7, 8%. Okay. And those may be the true ones, but let's just use four. That's just the number I'm using the last couple of years. If your real inflation is 4% and your student loan debt is 2%, right? If you run the math, and I probably should do this for you, it's astounding. So the amount of interest you would pay at 2% over, let's say, 20, 30 years versus how much your debt is devalued at 4% inflation over the 20 years, it's massively devalued your debt, right? So when they run like the thing and say, oh, you owe, $1 million. Well, by the time you pay that off, you would have paid, I don't know, 1.5 million or something, right? What you got to run on that 1.5 million, you need to run it like deflated, like over a 20-year curve or a 30-year curve, right? And you'll see that, like, wow, I'm paying like actually 1 million. Like what I owe is what I'm paying, right? And um, so I think the general concept here, and then when I think about like high inflationary environments, like what do I do? Um, in high inflationary environments, you don't want to hold cash. Okay. Your cash is getting deflated away very quickly. What you want to hold are appreciating assets, things that go up with inflation. Okay. Let me give you an example. Um, Food. Okay. Farming has got a ton of problems, right? But like natural resources, things that come from the earth go up with inflation. Okay. Gold and silver. We talked about in our headline the news thing, right? Like those prices are shooting up because of inflation or perceived inflation coming. Probably both. Um, but if you think about like water or um things you eat, wood, timber, right? On average, those things go up, right, with inflation. But then there's assets that go up anyways, like rents and those things too, right? So like with apartments, I like apartments because I can raise rents. You like apartments because you can raise rents every year. With commercial leases, I usually have fixed increases in my leases at
Yep.
2.5 or 3%. I try to get 3% most of the time. Every year my rent goes up by 3%. Well, what I started throwing in there after COVID was 3% or inflation, whatever's higher, right?
Yeah,
Whenever I could. But even we know that inflation metric's not real, but it helps. So really you want to have assets that are going to go up in price with you, right? You know that like every year, like if the government's not involved, like Subway sandwiches, the price of a Subway sandwich is a good item to anecdotally look at what inflation is, right?
sure.
It's not like they can manipulate, like the government manipulates gas prices, right? That's not a good yeah, that and then also like luxury goods, things that people choose to buy, right? That's another good like thing. So the way I look at it is find assets that are as passive as possible because I'm busy, they're gonna go up for me. And fixed rate debt is is always my number one that I go to. I try to get as much fixed rate debt as possible, and because that's super passive, right? I don't have to do anything to take advantage of that inflation, right? It does it for me. Um, and then yeah, I try to focus on asset classes that are going to
Appreciate
in
over time.
appreciate. So
Yeah.
those are the
So
first two thoughts I had.
okay. So I'll ask you this because you just talked about it, but then we can go back to more of the core principles here. But what is when you say long-term fixed rate debt, what does that look like? Are you saying like a 5-year fix, 10-year fix, 25-year fix? And what type of loan product is that? Is that an agency debt? Is
Uh,
that yeah, that
uh,
life
so
code? Where's that coming from?
So banks know this too, right? So they try to get all your commercial debt on, 5-year fix is the most common you see, right? 25-year amortization, but 5-year fix is the adjustment after 5 years. You don't want that. So especially when interest rates start to drop. So if interest rates are dropping, you expect inflation to go up, it's a no-brainer. Um, Historically, you could get like you can go to the secondary market. The secondary market like is like CMBS loans, insurance companies, those types of things, right? So like 4 or 5 years ago, all these old timers, right? They would build apartment buildings and then they'd refi them with agency debt or they'd get insurance debt, right? And I'd be like, oh man, you're not taking out your big cash out refi, right? And they don't, right? Because they've seen cycles go up and down. What they want is the longest term, lowest fixed rate debt, right? Because they know that's just going to create. People talk about cash flow in real estate, and cash flow doesn't come right away. It comes over time in real estate. It's really hard to get cash flow at the beginning, but cash flow goes up over time as your rents go down, but your debt doesn't. One way to maximize cash flow early is to not cash out refi and to get long-term fixed rate debt and
Leave more money in the deal.
leave more money in the
Equity.
deal. And
Yep.
then as your rents go up, your debt's always fixed, super low, and it's going to get devalued, and you're just going to cash flow more and more over the years. I mean, there's a lot of peace of mind and certainty to that. Um,
Can you put a time frame on that? Would you say that you're only going to put this long-term fixed rate debt on something you plan to hold for fill in the blank number of years? 5, 10, 15? What does it make sense? Because I'm sure that these long-term fixed rate loan products have high prepayment penalties, right? So you have
Sometimes
you're
they're
locked.
assumable, sometimes they're assumable,
Okay,
right? So you're not prepaying it, you're selling it to the next guy at that low rate, right? So there's two tracks here. There's I'm gonna own this asset forever because it's in a freaking awesome location and it's new and I just built it, right? So those ones, yeah, those are like trophy properties, right? So one thing is to think of your trophy property. Okay.
like
The
yep,
second is, hey, I'm gonna lock this in, and then hey, this is assumable. So like HUD, for instance, right? HUDs are assumable, right? So it's like if I do want to sell this, I'm not really losing because it's transferable, right? But
sure.
if it's not transferable, yeah, you only want to do this for trophy properties. Um, um, mhm.
Okay. So okay, let's pull it back to the original question of when do you decide to deleverage in your portfolio? Is there ever a time? And when I say deleverage, I'm not talking about, so if we, to the extremes of this, as you're talking about, is long-term fixed rate debt that you also are paying off aggressively. The other end of the spectrum of levering up is you cash out refi everything, right? And you do that as much as you can, and you always keep minimal equity in the deal, right? That's like maximum leverage. Would you kind of agree? I mean, obviously, actually, the extremes are you pay for properties in cash is one, right? No leverage. And then the other, the extreme is you lever up as much as you can with each property. You do cash out refis, you do lines of credit.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
so
yeah.
what is our sweet spot? And
Uh,
what,
yeah. I think you always have to focus on cash flow. I know you do this. I mean, you got to focus on cash flow because I think that's where people get tripped up, right? Is you really want to stick to good debt, right? Like I don't get debt on my car, right? That's a consumable. Anything that like is going to lose you money, you don't want to get debt on, right? The second house you buy, the first house you buy, you're poor, you're coming out of school. If you want to get a house for your family, great. You know, get a loan on it. The second house you buy, the nicer house, the bigger house, I would recommend people because that's not going to make you money typically, unless you get lucky timing wise, and we never want to bank on that. I would actually force yourself to pay for that thing in cash. Okay. So anything that's a want, not a need, I would pay for in cash. Okay. And then debt, you gotta look at risk. We talk about stocks as gambling, right? Yeah, you could buy Palantir stock and you can do like you can lever your stock
yep,
purchases, right? And you can make a ton of money, but that's straight gambling, right? So that's an example of gambling. I would not recommend that. You and me, we try to hedge our bets, okay? So I will get loans from banks that are a construction to perm loan. Okay, this is one loan type I get. So there's a construction loan at an interest rate, and then it flips to perm. Okay,
mhm,
so I know that like in insurance rates, if they jack up or whatever, I'm good because I have that permanent loan coming on the back end. Okay, so um, but what I'm doing too, and you do this as well, is I'm saying, okay, I don't really want this perm loan with this bank. This is just a risk mitigation strategy for me. So I'm going to ask this bank to not give me a prepayment penalty because really I want to refi it with agency debt at the end, right?
mhm.
If I just do the construction loan, unless it's like some crazy term one, which I've actually gotten some really good ones lately, I should tell you about that are totally different than historical. But um I want that option. So if interest rates skyrocket, I'm good because I already had that bridge to perm loan
Yes.
in
Yep.
place. And if the interest rates go down, now I'm refining into agency debt, no prepayment penalties, and I'm taking advantage of those really low rates. So it's not yes, debt. Debt will make me rich, right? It's watch your dang cash flows, invest in things that are real investments that you have control over the outcomes on, and then three, hedge whenever it's available.
Yep. Those are really good tips. I'm always kind of thinking about those same things. Is there, let's ask this then. So you have liquidity. You know how much liquidity you need at any given point in time. Liquidity, right? Cash in the bank. You have a fixed amount of that. Is there a point where you ever pay off debt sooner? I'm saying assume business, this is business debt. I'm not talking about your home, car. I mean, consumable debt is another thing, right? But I don't, right? If I like my interest rates where they're at, like I don't see the point in paying down business debt. Any debt that is generating revenue, I don't see the point.
I've seen a few people who mentally just literally can't do it, right? It
Mhm.
just stresses them out. And I've just told them, like, look, dude, just pay it off. Like, you understand the logic, you're a smart guy, and you physically can't not stress about the debt. So pay it off, right? The other piece I want to say is like sometimes things can hit us and we don't know where it's going to come from, right? And so when you get to a certain wealth level, okay, depends different for everybody. Let's say 10 million bucks, okay? Let's say for Dennis, like 10 million bucks, you feel like you're good, okay? you and me, we have plans, we probably wouldn't feel good at 10 million, right? But just in general, say 10 million is the number for folks. Doubling down from there is only going to increase your happiness by this much. Losing it all is going to decrease your happiness by a ton, right?
Yep.
So one thought I have had, just because of like black swan events, right? Nothing like logical, like completely
Yes.
illogical
Yep.
things happen, right? Is getting to a certain point where I take maybe 5 million, I pay off our house, I put everything in a domestic asset protection trust out of Nevada, right? Those are the next flexible ones, and throw all that in there. So
Mhm.
like if the biggest black swan event ever happened, we
Have
still
that.
have our house, we still
Yep.
have 5 million bucks, like that core. My wife's good, my kids are good, like everybody's good, right? Black
Yes.
swan will affect us, but black swan
Won't
won't
wreck us.
destroy us, right?
Yes.
And so I do think that's a good strategy once you get to a certain point to maybe tuck that away in a trust that creditors can't come after. So
Yep. Good,
and
good.
then last piece before we end this show, liquidity. 100% agree on liquidity. You are useless if you don't have liquidity. I am useless. I don't have liquidity. The banks don't want to talk to me, right? If I need their money, they don't want to give it to me,
Yep.
right? So the banks need that flexibility. Deals pop up. Sometimes I just need liquidity. You need to have that solid chunk of liquidity. That is so important. And what allows me to have debt on so many different things, there's always a little bit of risk on things, right? What allows me is I always keep that core cash central so I could outlay, right? If a tenant leaves, right, and you got to pay a broker for the new tenant, or you got to pay for
Yes.
some TI costs, right? You don't want to not have that new tenant in there. So
It's
that's
also it allows you to solve problems very quickly, right? You
yeah,
inject the capital into the problem, you solve it, you move on. It allows you to
yeah.
sleep good at night. When you have this many irons in the fire, like that is your war chest that you can deploy when you need to. And that's the only thing. The older I get, the more I want that core war chest.
And that number goes up over time, right? It
Yes.
just keeps
Yep.
getting bigger and bigger, like what's your comfort level. So all right, guys, that was a great question, Reed. We could probably talk about this a lot more, and I think we probably will over the next 2 years because there's going to be a lot of debt conversations. So, thanks for being on the show today. Thanks for everybody for tuning in. And if you want to learn more, come visit us on our Facebook group, Dental Real Estate Partners. We'd love to have you. A lot of great folks on there, a lot of great discussions, and it's all
Good
about
time.
getting educated and finding our freedom and our best lives. So, all right, Reed, have a good one.
Have fun in Seattle.
Thanks. That's a wrap.